In this video, we're going to be going back to basics. I'm going to be sharing some of my accounting knowledge, experience working with brokers and banks on how to start and scale a property portfolio. I haven't made one of these videos for a while, taking you through a step-by-step process, but this applies going from 0 to 1, 1 to 2, and 2 to 5 properties. It's about understanding how the brokers and bankers work and exactly how Emily and I scaled our property portfolio. There's lots of 1% tips, so I hope you get value out of this content. If you could subscribe to the channel and drop a like if you find it useful, that'd be awesome. But let's take a look and dive in straight away. So how do we scale? We've got scaling here. We've got a little scenario here where you're buying a house and you buy it for $600,000. So you purchased the house for $600K and you took out $500,000 worth of debt. So you put in 100 grand cash and you've got 30 grand left over maybe for some renovations. So this is exactly what Emily and I have done for pretty much every property. We've done a cosmetic renovation to force market value, because you can force value through renos or developments. And renos are probably the smallest style and the cheapest style of DIY development that you can add value to a house on. Give it a paint, do the floors, spruce it up. You're putting in your own sweat equity. And so this is what we've done to fast track our journey. Now, you don't have to do this. You could pay trades, or you don't have to do it at all. And you can go to step number 2, which we're about to look at. So if you want to go on the fast track on how to scale, I think renos are a great way to fast track that process. Some people will say chase the hot spots, but in my opinion, I'd rather buy with great fundamentals for market growth and then use the reno to force value to speed up the process. So we bought our house for $600K, there's $500K debt, we used $100,000 cash, and that leaves us 30 grand for the reno. We're all in 130 grand, and that increases the value by spending 30K, say up to 700 grand. Now that could be a mix of both market growth, and it could be a mix of market growth and manufactured value. So I'm not saying that the 30K has increased it by 100. I'm saying it might have increased it by 60, and the other 40 might have been the market, if that makes sense. Now, we get a bank valuation, say 12 months later. So we bought our first place for 600. We get a bank valuation 12 months later for 700K. That means we can pull out debt of 560 grand. That will give you, paying out the old debt, 60 grand cash back. So you were already out 100. You're going to have to leave that 100K in the deal regardless. And you had 30K that you put into a reno, and you had some market growth. So you were able to cash out 60 grand by paying out the old debt and increasing with new debt of $560,000. So what that leaves you is 60K. Now you could take that 60K and start again. Can I buy another house? And can I use that 60K plus some savings to buy another 600K house? And then do I want to renovate, or do I want to sit on that? So it gives you options. You could also let the market do some heavy lifting and pull money out again. There's no limit to the number of times you can refinance. So let's say you go back and another year's passed and the market's grown significantly. You've had, this looks over 10%. You're looking at kind of 15% growth. You have a big year of growth and you get 15%. Great, we're at 800K. So we can pull more debt at say 640 grand, which takes it up another 80K for cash out. And so that could be used to buy another property as a deposit. So you buy another house, and I'm using 600K as an example because it's still possible to buy 600K houses. Now that will give you 3 houses, 1, 2, 3 at 600 grand a pop for each of those, and 800 grand based on the market value of this one. And so you're building out and scaling a property portfolio, and you're using equity to do so. This is exactly how Emily and I started and scaled our property portfolio. We basically bought our first home. We bought it for $800,000. We spent our own weekends and nights painting, adding a kitchenette, renovating a bathroom, doing all these things to force value. And so forcing value is one way to add and increase the value on a property, as well as waiting for the market to grow. Now, one thing you need to understand is you can't just magically pull out money. You need serviceability. Now, that's going to depend on your day job incomes. So if you're a double income, no kids, dinks, and you're earning 100K each, that's going to give you 200K of gross borrowing power. Now, you're in a much better position than another family. You know, you might have a family of 4 who are also earning 200K, but their living expenses are going to be very different. So that's going to impact your serviceability. That's why it's important to strategize. If you've got a baby on the way, or you've got another kid on the way, and you're expanding the family, or someone's going to drop down from work, that's going to change how the serviceability calculators work. And so you want to sit down with your broker and make sure you're maximizing your serviceability. The ways to do that are obviously to increase your incomes, for that to go to, 300K, 400K. The average Australian is probably earning around $80,000 to $100,000. But if you can ask your boss and you can get a pay rise to 120 and your partner's on 120, you then got 240 as a household, which can be used for servicing. Now, the idea is that you're then using your capital or the equity to draw down from. So these are the two key requirements. Number one is the serviceability, and two is the capital. So the game of broking and working with the banks is a game of serviceability and a game of capital or equity. And so if you have the serviceability, then you might be able to draw out the equity. And then if you've got the serviceability, you can buy another property and scale. And this is how people, buy 10 houses. Because what they do is they either have a, $500,000 income, or the properties are positively geared, bringing in so much money that they add to their income. So if they're positively geared, bringing in 10 to 20K a week, that'd be nice, 10 to 20K a year, that might add an extra net income of something like, 60 grand. So they're earning, actually, from the bank's perspective, 560 grand if they're positively geared. Now, if you're negatively geared, say it's minus 20K, minus 10K, that's obviously coming off your income. So if you're a household earning 200K, that will reduce your servicing, but it won't actually reduce it by 60K usually. Because of negative gearing, you'll get some tax benefits. So that might actually reduce it only to 460,000. So this is where it gets really interesting when you're dealing with negative gearing benefits and capital gains tax. There's different strategies to understand. I wouldn't want to have a portfolio like this with 4 houses which are negatively geared. I generally want to balance it. So you might have your first one minus 20, your next one positive 10, your next one might be positive 10 as well, and this one might be minus 10. And so you might be minus 10K overall in terms of those costs. And the key takeaway here is it's a juggling act. It's juggling between servicing and capital and the ability to refinance. If you look at our approach, yes, interest rates were lower. Yes, you could get a 3% servicing rate. And it might be more tough today to do that, but it's still possible. It's about buying the right assets to allow you to keep moving forward. I deal with clients that might only have a borrowing capacity of $700,000. And in their example, they're just going to have to get their foot on the board. You can only buy a $600K to $700K house. Now, you might need the market to grow, and you might need your day job to grow. So the market might grow and you might gain some equity. Now, to access that 100K equity, which is only generally at 80%, so you're going to be able to access actually 80 grand. To access that 80 grand, it's increasing your debt position. To do that, you might need to earn, instead of 80K, 100K a year or 120K a year per year in earnings. And so it's a juggling act between your income and your capital. And this gets easier over time because properties grow. You can sell down some assets if you get stuck. Or if you're partnering like Emily and I did, so if you've got a wife or a spouse that you can partner with throughout this journey, it can make it a lot easier, especially if you go harder while you've got double income, no kids, and you're not in a situation when you've got 3-4 dependents. That could change the servicing calculator significantly. The other thing to look at is if CBA will give you 700K, a company like Pepper Money might give you another 700K with the same metrics. And so it's about working, this would be called a first tier bank, and this would be a second or third tier. And so you might be able to pick up 1 to 3 properties with your big banks, and then 1 or 2 more with your second and third tier banks. Noting that these are going to be at a 6% interest rate, and these might be a 7 or 8% interest rate. 1 to 2 percentage points higher. Now, that's the truth for my story. We bought 3 houses initially and we tapped out. Emily and I were growing our day job incomes, starting on 50K a year each, saving our pennies, breaking into our first property purchase, adding value through renovations, growing the property portfolio over time, and scaling that way. Once we tapped out with CBA, that's when we looked at we literally used Pepper. And Pepper were willing at the time to give us not just $700K, $2 million, they said. Now, we ended up buying a $1.4 million unit block in Coffs Harbour, And that property would be worth close to $2 million now since we bought it. And the rents have grown, the market value has grown, the rebuild value has grown of that property. And we wouldn't have gotten that purchase if we hadn't pushed from CBA down to Pepper. Now, you don't want to stay with these third tier lenders forever. You are at risk. You could get what's called, locked in by the bank if you can't refinance and you put yourself in a financial pinch. So make sure you've got enough cash flows. Make sure you've got money in the offset account. Make sure you've got your buffers in place before you go pushing, and extending your borrowing capacity with these second and third tier lenders. You need to have the buffers, you need to have the cash flow, and you need to run your numbers. So this is your accounting and your numbers. I'd be very worried about people that push their borrowing capacity but don't truly understand their net position or the ins and outs of their property portfolio. As a chartered accountant myself, Emily and I had a lot of confidence in the actual income and expenses and the forecasting that we were doing. And so we knew over time, if the property values had grown, that our incomes continued to grow, we continued to work hard at our day jobs, and then eventually, purpose property now, growing and scaling the business, that we were able to move back from a Pepper money. So say you use a Pepper, you might finance at a 7% interest rate or an 8% interest rate. It shouldn't be for 30 years. That's what the mortgage docs are going to say, but you should be thinking in your head, I can refinance when it makes sense for me. And you should have a broker that's willing to do that for you if you want to stick with them for the long run. That broker should want your business across your portfolio, so they should be willing to help you. And I assess every 6 months with my broker, my position. And so I'd be looking to refinance that money out of Pepper at 7 or 8% back to a mainstream lender at 6 or 6.5% within 1 to 2 years. And so if the market values have grown across your portfolio, the rents have slowly grown, and your day job income has grown, it'll be easier to refinance and service with a mainstream bank and lower that interest rate. And the interesting thing here is it's actually harder to buy a property than it is to refinance it. I found that in reality myself, that I found it easier to buy a property with a second or third tier and then move it to a first tier at a later date. And I've made some acquisitions in the last year and will continue probably in the future to grow the property portfolio when it makes sense for myself and my boys. And I want to be strategic about that. So be strategic when you're looking at balancing the serviceability and the growth. Look at these strategies of harvesting equity, adding value, or waiting for the market and buying with market growth in mind so that you can continue to scale. It's that balancing act of serviceability and capital/equity that allows you to scale and grow the property portfolio. If you are looking for a Brisbane buyer's agent to help you secure your own home or an investment property in Brisbane in the next 3 to 6 months, head over to purposeproperty.com.au. There's myself and the team. We work with up to 8 clients at a time. It's a tailored service. I am a chartered accountant by trade, a fully licensed buyer's agent as well. And so we help people buy properties here in Southeast Queensland that meet their goals. We buy the right property for the right price in the right location. So I'd love to have a chat with you if you're interested in that. And give this video a click over here because YouTube thinks that's the one to watch. So give that one a click and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.